All right, it's me again, it's you again, and I'm very happy to have you back here again for yet another conversation that I had on Thursday with Colby Hall of Mediaite, whose writing I just absolutely love. Pretty much everything he posts over at that very popular website that I monitor multiple times a day. I'm always reading his stuff. I don't know how he turns things around so quickly, how he synthesizes so much information, but it's super helpful when you're in media, much less if you aren't, to know what's happening in the world and politics. Also, they cover a whole bunch of other issues, culture, sports, and more at Mediaite, but I especially like Colby's writing over there. He's the founding editor of Mediaite.com, also a Peabody Award-winning television producer, a nonfiction narrative programming, and I just love his takes. And lately he has been writing several good pieces, one of which really caught my attention. Jim Jordan's failed speaker bid exposes just how bad Trump and MAGA media has been for Republicans. Such an important piece. We talk about that and a whole lot more in today's conversation that we had in the midst of the GOP speaker nominating crisis and the explosion at the hospital in Gaza that killed several innocent people. No possible way to know exactly how many people, by the way. There's just no good sources right now, and it's very, very hard to get that information. We talk a little bit about that as well. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Colby Hall. If you do, let me know. If you don't, let me know. I think you will. Thanks to everybody supporting the podcast with a paid subscription. I cannot do it without you. If you aren't signed up, go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick right now and join our amazing growing community, the Discord platform that's always open 24/7. But right now, it's time to get to my conversation with Colby Hall of Mediaite.com. Oh, yeah, there he is. One of my favorite writers in all of the internet, exists in real life as well. Colby Hall, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Always a pleasure to join you.
I don't know how you do it, man. You keep me and everybody else so up to date with what's happening. You've got a lot of plugins, a lot of sources, a lot of things that you're taking in and then sharing them with us. I appreciate your work.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm just obsessed with new information and have ADHD and I just pay attention, but it's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
You must have do you have a few screens going all the time? I mean, you're on top of everything, I feel like.
Well, TweetDeck, even though under Elon Musk's leadership has really sort of gotten way worse, it's still the ability to organize columns of information by list. So White House press conference is a list that I follow. I'm also obsessed with the Arsenal football team, so I follow them obsessively. And, I track news, cable news. So it's all out there if you just sort of stare and look at it. The mornings in particular, you kind of if you're operating as a news editor, you kind of have to act with urgency and alacrity. It's a problem in today's, sort of media ecosystem that being first matters.
Yeah.
And because it lends to a lot of wasteful haste and stories that, get a lot of trouble. I mean, what we're seeing right now with the uprisings in the protest against the hospital bombing is in part due to the fact that people rushed up stories that have proven to be unverified by who's responsible for that. And it's a real, it's a perfect example of how, you really can't rush good reporting.
I think if there was zero reporting on that hospital bombing, everybody would have had the same opinion as to who did it.
Again, that story is an impossible thing to talk about because people take meaning that was unintended, and it's just the classic example of confirmation bias. It's just awful. Yeah. Yeah, I like that you seem to be able to filter your own confirmation bias out. I never know where you're going. I think it's really good. All right, enough compliments. Let's get to some of these stories that you have been... No, we're not done with the compliments.
Okay, well, what I was going to say, I had one more thing, and it's less of a compliment, more of a concern when you're doing that work. You got to always be on. I hope that Colby's getting nature.
I just got a dog, and that's getting me outside. He's a little puppy that's chewing up and leaving steaming piles of crap all over my apartment, which is great fun. But I'm, now as the hibernation season is coming, so we'll see.
We just have to keep you healthy. All right, so here's the first one. This seems like a big story breaking on Thursday morning that's going to have a lot of relevance. The headline that you have at Mediaite, ex-Trump lawyer Sidney Powell pleads guilty in election crimes trial. We could do all the Kraken has released jokes, but this is a serious development, is my understanding. You're covering. Why does this matter so much in Georgia case?
Well, it's the first massive shoe to drop, right? Like the reason why Fani Willis sort of indicted 19 individuals in this case was it's trying to get people to turn state's witness, right? And say that there's this larger conspiracy. And if there's, probably the single most visible leader of this conspiracy, other than maybe Rudy Giuliani, was Sidney Powell, who literally sort of went on every outlet that she could to make this claim that there was clear, and the claims that she made were so absurd, like Hugo Chavez, and it's just crazy what she said. And so she basically has agreed now to sort of be, when Ellie Honig said this on CNN, the narrator of the unfolding case. There's a lot of questions here, though, because she never represented Trump as a client attorney, but you don't necessarily have to have that formal relationship. The one sort of legal loophole that still is unclear to me, and I'm not a legal mind, because she is a lawyer and because she was advising Trump, he may still be able to claim some sort of like he was following legal advice from a lawyer, which, I think is thinner and thinner and thinner. But
I don't know much at all, except that this is a racketeering case. And I think that all these 19 people were part of the organization doing the racketeering. And so he might have some legal defense here or not. But she, according to your article, she's going to get 6 years probation, a $6,000 fine, $2,700 in restitution. She has to apologize. But more importantly, she's not going to get jail time. But now she's going to testify at future trials in the case against Donald Trump and for the state.
And not just the Fani Willis case in Georgia, but also the federal cases that Jack Smith is bringing forward. Remember, Jack Smith and Fani Willis have parallel tracks that are kind of covering the same territory. She also agreed, and they stipulated this, that she has to testify truthfully, which is a rare thing to stipulate. And I think it was a smart one because given her track record, typically every oath includes some sort of pledge to tell the truth, but they made that stipulation. I think the repercussions of this are still unfolding. But, again, I'm citing Ellie Honig, who's a friend and very talented and really smart legal analyst on CNN. He calls this disastrous for Trump.
Well, he's not alone. I have a Twitter channel of my own of lawyers and their reactions, and they're all having seemingly similar reactions here.
Right. No, I think this is a massive shoe to drop. And I've always wondered about that metaphor of shoes dropping, how that came to be. But this is not, Trump is distracted by this dumb business fraud case in New York, which really should be the least of his concerns. But I think it's high priority because that business fraud case really strikes to the very core of his own sort of self-value and self-worth. It's almost like the racketeering thing and the stolen election stuff is almost secondary to the fact that he's long considered him the art of the deal, sort of fake billionaire guy. And what Letitia James is really, really getting on his nerves. But that's all a distraction to this other thing that, I'm loath to say that he's going to end up in an orange jumpsuit, and I'm still skeptical of that. But, I wrote an article. This is what we talked about. It's time for us to have a discussion collectively as a nation of what it means for us to put a former president in prison. We need to kind of I'm not sure that that's going to happen. I think it probably won't happen. But I've never thought there was greater chances than now. And that's a thing that we need to kind of get our heads around.
Yeah, I didn't see that piece, but I think it is an important question. But my big thing that my rant that I often do when given the opportunity is that this country, as long as, in my lifetime, especially, and certainly as long as I've been covering stuff, about 15 years covering politics, there's accountability needed on so many big bad things that happen. And while we really need to have that discussion for all the reasons I'm sure you stated in that article, well, I feel like what we need more than anything is accountability for powerful people, entities, organizations, etc.
Every parent who's ever learned how to properly raise a kid is like, actions have consequences.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as a bad boy, but a boy who does something like you have to be held accountable.
I agree
And
with that.
so in fundamentally, that's where I land. This isn't a political thing. It's not Jack Smith or the DOJ who is at fault here. It's the guy who did the stuff. And if we're not willing to hold Trump and anyone else in that level of power to account, we're giving everyone in the future a pass. It's, no one is above the law. It's a very simple way to say it. And so, and I think it's sad. I think it's sad that we're at a point where we elected a president that so openly flouts accepted behavior that we're at a point now where, I don't want to have to try and imprison a former president, but if a former president's going to fuck around, then he's going to find out. And I think that's where we are.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. It is sad.
Can I say found out on this?
Yeah, you can say all those things. I love that. I love that phrase. It never gets old to me at all because it's a real good way of articulating the consequences of your actions, as you said. And I think it is sad. I agree with you. I think it's sad. I think it's an important thing to say. But I think it's sad when the principal of the school, the mayor of the town, the governor, people who are supposed to be kind of moral thought leaders and have a certain kind of behavior, anytime they let you down. But for it to be the president of the United States and for so many people to have supported that and still support it, that's really sad. That is a tough thing when you find out that your kind of whatever your moral clarity is, it's not shared by a lot of people, a lot of your neighbors, friends.
That's a whole other conversation. That's not worth getting into, but the death of moral clarity, the death of meaning, the fact that we have elected so many cynical people where brazen lying and bullshit is all part of the game. And it's a lack of sort of fundamental respect of how the world's supposed to work. It's a lack of social contract, and it's really sad.
It is, but one consequence, we could talk about how it's affecting the GOP nomination for a House Speaker is, and I've said this, I'm sorry to my audience, but pretty much every episode this week when talking about it, because I think it's important, that Jim Jordan is not being held to account for what he did. In fact, it's not a liability that he was a co-conspirator in an insurrection. It's an asset. And that, I think, is something that's evidence of the point that we're trying to make here about moral clarity. He's getting that many votes. In the end, he probably won't get the gig, but the fact that he is even being considered shows a lot about the lack of accountability, or more important, that it's actually an asset to have been an insurrectionist.
It's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
Right? The thing that he is so toxically combative, and that he treats every sort of political sort of debate as a knife fight, and there is zero compromise or collaboration. That's happening within the Republican conference, and that's why he can't rally support. And, the other part to this is that the Republican Party has forever argued that government is inept and incompetent. And then as a result of that, they never really have to be held to account, because any sort of incompetence that they put forth is just evidence of their thesis.
Very well said.
And it's a real problem. And I think you have a small, vocal, sort of moderate voice within the House Republicans who go back to the traditional conservatives, the sort of Rockefeller Republicans, who are finally standing up and saying, this is total bullshit. We got to do something here, which is sort of what I got to in that column that originally I think was the reason I came on. Yeah.
And I want to get to that. Ellie Mistal tweeted yesterday, when you vote for the party that doesn't want government to work, government doesn't work.
Right.
Right. The piece that you wrote yesterday, to me, it's everything. Jim Jordan's failed speaker bid exposes just how bad Trump and MAGA media has been for Republicans. This is my thing. This is why I think your work and the people that do similar work is so important. Watching media, all media, but especially the right-wing media, is so important, because the right-wing media stars, the most influential of them, are so influential on the Republican Party at every level, local, state, and government. Whatever narrative they come up with is going to influence, in this case, who is going to be nominated for the House. Sean Hannity was apparently whipping votes, still is apparently, for Jim Jordan, but they can't govern, because the difference that I've said forever, and I want you to pick up here, is there's a huge difference between governing and hosting a radio show. So one needs ratings and to divide people and to create problems, and the other needs to actually bring people together. That is not on the same page, and the Republican Party has been totally run by, I think, the right-wing media. You've been covering this, so talk to me specifically how that adheres here, or broader, in a broader context, if you agree with that narrative.
Well, I mean, I think you stated it beautifully, and I think the thesis is pretty clear that, Jim Jordan will be up for his third vote today. Today is Thursday. And it seems very unlikely that he will get the votes. This, despite Trump endorsing him repeatedly, Sean Hannity sort of trying to strong arm, and his producers calling people, and then Steve Bannon and others basically saying, we got to get behind Jim Jordan. And that totally backfired. And it literally, Byron Donalds, who's a MAGA Florida Republican, admitted on Fox News, yes, the strong arming campaign did not work. The larger issue is that, starting with Trump, he doesn't really care. He's literally using this as a means to self-promote, because he's a carnival barker, and that's what we know him to be. Sean Hannity is, a proud conservative, and I sort of respect the fact that he doesn't try to hedge. He just says what he says. And his segment producer emailed people asking people why they're not voting for Jim Jordan. I took less issue with that, because I've seen segment producers pre-produce segments. That's unpretty, but it's not a cardinal sin. That happens. The fact that he called people allegedly, according to the Washington Post, and sort of pressured people to vote. But none of these guys, none of them, and this is the issue, none of these people have to ever get anything done. The only thing they have to do is say crazy, over-the-top stuff that draws eyeballs and gets ratings. Fox News is an incredibly lucrative outlet. Its ratings are more than MSNBC and CNN combined. It is a cash machine. They don't need to pass any bills. They don't need to do anything other than make sure that people tune in. So as a result, they've fostered this really toxic ecosystem in which the only Republicans that you typically see on Fox News are the people who are Ted Cruz promoting his dumb podcast, John Kennedy saying outrageous things, Matt Gaetz being a clown. It's kayfabe. It's the professional wrestling, like, they're the bad guy, we're evil. And it's all performative. But that's the reason why there's no collaboration within the Republican House GOP conference. And so Mike Lawler, who's a moderate New York Republican, my congressman. And he's been a voice of fucking reason throughout this whole thing. And he was on Fox and Friends, and Lawrence Jones was just kind of hectoring, saying, like, why didn't you vote for Jordan? Why didn't you vote for Jordan? As if it were that easy. And Lawler just said, Jordan isn't willing to collaborate or compromise with anyone. So you have a Fox and Friends opinion host who's good on TV. He's basically saying, well, just vote for him. Like, it's not that easy. And so the thesis is that Fox News is making a ton of money. You could argue that it's pernicious to society. But the Republican Party has never been weaker. They got housed in the midterms. Trump didn't get reelected. The Biden impeachment inquiry has fallen flat. There's a long list of fails, and I would love nothing more than to see a return to reasonable kind of Rockefeller Republican, or even like, William Buckley's sort of principled conservatism, and not Trumpism, which has been good for business, but really bad for government. So that's my plattering on. Forgive me for rambling.
No, I like all of it, and I'm trying to pick which thread to pull out. I gotta push back a little bit on my Congressman Mike Lawler has been a voice of reason only, and I bet you'll when you see it this way, I want to know what you think. Actually, is what's irking the shit out of me about my congressman, and that he is acting like the mature moderate in the room by saying we can't let these extremists look at these extremists taking us down. But on the other hand, Mike Lawler is a product of MAGA, and more importantly, will be supporting Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a product of the extremists. So when I hear Trey Gowdy on Fox News reprimanding these guys, or even Joe Walsh, or these even more reform guys, I'm like, y'all created this. It was it was always going to end this way. Republican media has been so divisive. We can talk about how progressive media is too, but the Republican media, as long as I've listened to it, it's us and them as the whole model. Well, guess what? It has finally gotten down to it's us and them in the Republican House. It finally has led to its logical conclusion, which is my point. What do you think?
I think that's exactly right. I think everything's relative. And when I say voice of reason for Mike Lawler, I don't mean writ large. I mean just in this instance. The fact that Jim Jordan, of all people, who played a central role in January 6th and has been, he was a big vocal part of the whole, going back to Benghazi with Hillary.
Yes. That's
he has been sort of an unreasonable and divisive force. And the fact that he is even being considered and got 100 and whatever, like all but 22 votes to become House Speaker from the Republican Party is an outrage. It's an abject outrage. So when I laud Mike Lawler for being a voice of reason, I want to clarify that it's just really in this very small instance.
It's fine. It's like hard to see some of these people complaining about how there's all these extremists when they were extremists. I mean, even all the way back to John Boehner, like he seems so moderate to so many people. And I'm like, I cover John Boehner. Like, no, he was an extremist in terms of he called Jim Jordan a legislative terrorist. John Boehner wouldn't allow a Senate bill on comprehensive immigration to come to a vote. He wouldn't let it come to a vote on the House floor. That was the most extremist. Why? Because it would have passed and they wouldn't have that immigration as a wedge issue because every special interest is for cheap labor.
Right.
Folks. I don't know if you knew it. And it's...
It really started with the Tea Party movement.
Yes.
And Eric Cantor is another guy.
Yeah.
I mean, Eric Cantor, I don't remember it specifically, but I think he had one of those sort of, it's not a deathbed conversion, but he had that sort of like, realization, like, what I was doing was really divisive and wasn't that. It's like, I mean, it's good for you for coming to that conclusion now, but it's kind of full of shit.
He was an extremist who got primaried by a more extreme guy. I mean, like I don't know where, it's always worth asking, where your Overton window? And mine is, I don't know. I feel like it's fairly moderate objective in terms of it covering closely politics for 15 years. I got those bookends. I got Boehner and I got whatever is happening now, and Trump.
I go back to Lee Atwater and the Willie Horton
Fair enough.
Spot for I think George H.W. Bush was the last sort of like kind, maybe Dole. Dole refused to go super ugly against Clinton. He took the high road and he lost, and he lost a lot of support. And, George W. Bush, was... I think he was he's smarter than he gets credit for, but he was a willful participant in some sort of divisive misinformation. And that was the rise to Fox News.
Well,
frankly.
Yeah, he was run certainly by Karl Rove and Dick Cheney. He was like, yeah, I'll do that, But
then like Mitt Romney, he was, Massachusetts governor. He created the model for Obamacare. He was and is a moderate voice, but the only way he could get the nomination, we saw it again with McCain in 2008. Both these dudes were sort of outliers with a sort of groupthink of the Republican Party. And the only way they could get the nomination was by throwing the red meat on really divisive issues to get the nomination.
Yeah.
And by the time they did that, they sort of painted themselves into an unelectable corner, which is not a corner you want to be in. There are other corners that are better than unelectable corners, especially if you're running for president. But then, the Tea Party outrage and, I started covering all this stuff like for Mediaite when Obamacare passed, and we were told at large, like, it's going to lead to a depression. It's going to be a disaster. And has that happened? No.
It is as popular as it could ever be and gaining popularity when people realize what it is. And thank God for it.
Apart from the, the pandemic and sort of Ukraine war, like, the inflation is up, but the economy has really sort of surged over the last. Part of it is Trump's tax cuts because that was a sugar rush. I mean, it's raised our debt by trillions, and it was deeply financially irresponsible. The economy has gone well despite Obamacare and the warnings and how convinced we were by the right that it'll lead to.
Yeah.
So there, it's. I don't think that it's. how do you have a reasonable debate with a person who has no interest or is not willing to honor the truth?
That's what good faith. That's exactly. Yes, you can't. I mean, you're not having a good debate with someone who's not arguing in good faith, with someone who's not, being right. consistent. I'll never forget the worst guy at that I encountered in my career was this guy, Boris Epstein.
Oh,
he used to come on and I would be like, as soon as the camera would turn off when we were on CNN, we'd go at it. And then he would come on my show. He'd beg to come on my show at Sirius. And I'd always be like, you don't even believe what you're saying, right. Or you're not being consistent. You're saying this guy can steal, but that guy cannot steal. Like, what are we doing? And there's so much of that out there, and it's really a waste of time. And that's, I think I probably categorize that as Earth 1 and 2 thinking for sure.
Well, I know Boris, and Boris is a great dude to talk to, but then you see the shit that he says publicly, like, I can't really, come on, man. And here's the secret that I would tell, people don't really know.
Turns out he's, by the way, like a terrible person. Like he apparently allegedly assaulted several women.
He denies it. I will say that he's denied it, but I can't comment one way or the other. Many vocal conservative divisive voices are not true believers in the way they portray themselves.
Well, that's ridiculous.
I think Sean Hannity is actually a true conservative voice who really believes it. And by the way, a lovely guy to his staff. He's one of the most popular guys within the hall at Fox News, which I think is worth noting. However, there's a bunch of people out there who say crazy shit on air, not because they believe it to be true, but they like flying private and they like the resources. And it's a real flaw in our free speech dynamic when there's a lack of social contract and the sort of ephemeral nature of meaning, and everything is subjective, and we all have our own personal truths. You can exploit that to the degree that, like, it kind of really hurts, if not kills, democracy. And I don't know how we get out of that spiral that we're in right now.
It's a great question. Let me ask you one final, though, about your piece about Fox News you published at Mediaite last week. Who will tell the people? Fox News puts a very heavy thumb on the 2024 scale by bearing negative Trump news. How do you assess that?
Well, I got a lot of pushback from Fox saying, we did cover that on Howie Kurtz. And it's like, like a 3-minute segment on a Sunday morning. Jon Kelly was the guy that was the architect of the draconian family separation thing at the border. The policy that most Fox News opinionists laud. He was the longest serving chief of staff under Trump, and he confirmed the report in the Atlantic that Trump called the soldiers who gave their lives defending our country suckers and losers. That is Jon Kelly should be deified by Fox News. But that story was entirely ignored. So Fox News viewers, which represents about half of all cable news viewers, are left uninformed about that. They're left uninformed about Trump calling Hezbollah smart. And they weren't told that, he called for the execution of Mark Milley. These are stories that if anyone else were to say this, squad member, Biden, anyone, they would have sold a lot of soap on that, and there would have been a ton of outrage. But when they decide to just sort of ignore the negative stories on Trump because their viewers don't want to see it, they're not a news program. They're not a news outlet. And you want to know why Trump's so high up in the polls? Because a lot of his supporters don't know or are keeping their head in the sand. And Fox News is not acting like a news outlet. They're acting like an outrage entertainment machine that sort of packaged as news. The Daily Show Jon Stewart really said, like, we're not a news show that tries to be funny. We're a comedy show packaged as news. Right. Fox News is an outrage entertainment program that looks and feels like news, and occasionally there's news reporting that comes out of it. But really, it's all about not pissing off their audience. And there was a little bit of a William Greider nod and like, who will tell the people? Fox News is not telling the people the whole story. And that is a big reason why Trump is still persistent, which is crazy to me. So that's that. So
glad that's the main point that you mentioned, because that's the one that I just keep asking people about. Trump supporters, it's my go-to is Jon Kelly's comments, as well as plenty of others that military members who have heard, and we've seen him publicly say what he said about John McCain, and I think George H.W. Bush as well. I like people who don't get shot down. So it's never hard to believe. But the fact that Jon Kelly said that, the fact that Fox News isn't covering, the fact that people don't know that is terrible. Because like you said, if any Democrat ever said anything remotely disparaging about someone who died, much less served, much less, it would be, you said, sell a lot of soap on it. It would be huge ratings. But how are they covering? I don't really know the court cases, the legal cases. It's just all.
They're largely, the way that it gets covered is sort of repeating, like on opinion primetime shows, it's being sort of amplified. Trump's witch hunt, sort of two tiers of justice, which is absurd and undermines justice itself. Yeah. What you're hearing on primetime. I was really curious after the Sidney Powell plea deal. It got 50 seconds, Dana Perino, and to her credit, the news had just broken. But the way that they choose to, this kind of gives up the whole thing. If she admits that the whole thing was a conspiracy and that Trump was in on it, how do they ignore that? And they've painted themselves into a corner where they, by covering it now, it's almost an admission that, we sort of swept it under the rug. Now, again, they would point out, we have said this. And it's true that there are small examples, but they're the examples that prove the larger rule in my mind, that they're mostly giving it a pass. And that double standard, nothing means anything, right? Nothing means anything. It just, as long as you wear a flag and paint yourself in sort of like America first, then you can kind of get away with anything. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, it is a real problem. Well, I cannot thank you enough for talking to me today. Keep up the great work. Thank you to the news gods who put all of the news on hold while you spent this time talking to me. They're about to let it go again, so I'll let you go.
You put the button on, now we can go again.
The world stopped while we were talking, and I appreciate that.
All right. Well, Pete, thanks for having me. I always enjoy chatting with you.
Talk soon again, buddy. Thank you very much.
Good stuff.
All right. There it is. Colby Hall, Mediaite. Go check it out. All the links to Mediaite and Colby's work are in the show notes. More about him there and everywhere, everybody else that joins the show. It's been a hell of a week already, and I still have a few more surprises up my sleeve, I think. So we will see what happens, but I think I should be posting a couple more conversations. So look for them to drop, and if you aren't a subscriber, please sign up now, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can always, if you are a subscriber, pay more, as a couple of you have just done, which is so much appreciated. Can't do it without your support. But for now, on to the next one. Thank you, Colby Hall. Thank you for listening. And thank Jon Carroll, as always, for the theme music.
Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Stand up. Got to stand